I covered my family's rent, groceries, and car payments for years. The one time I asked for help after surgery, my dad declared, "You're not our responsibility." So I stopped paying. 8 days later, they were begging in my driveway. I, 32M, never imagined I'd be writing this. But here I am at 3 a.m., unable to sleep, replaying the events of the past week in my head. 8 days ago, I made a decision that changed everything. 8 days ago, I stopped being the family ATM. Let me start from the beginning. For the past 6 years, I've been the financial backbone of my family. Dad lost his job when the factory closed down, and Mom's part-time retail work barely covered their medication costs. My younger sister dropped out of college and moved back home with her 2 kids after her boyfriend disappeared. What started as temporary help became a permanent arrangement where I paid their rent, covered groceries, handled car payments, and basically kept them afloat. I didn't mind initially. Family helps family, right? I had a good job in tech, made decent money, and lived modestly. But as months turned into years, the requests never stopped. New tires for Dad's truck, sister's daycare costs, Mom's dental work, emergency repairs, birthday gifts for the kids. It was always something. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago when I collapsed at work. Sharp, stabbing pain in my abdomen that doubled me over in the middle of a presentation. The ambulance ride, emergency surgery for a ruptured appendix, complications that kept me hospitalized for 5 days. It was a nightmare. But what happened next was worse. When I called Dad from the hospital bed, groggy from anesthesia and scared, I asked if someone could pick me up when I got discharged and maybe help me out for a few days while I recovered. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Dad's voice came through, cold and detached, telling me I was a grown man who should figure things out myself. They weren't my responsibility, he said, and I wasn't theirs. Those words hit harder than the surgical pain. After 6 years of covering their expenses, of skipping vacations, and driving a beat-up car so they could live comfortably, I wasn't their responsibility. The man who I'd kept from losing his house was telling me to handle my own problems. I took an Uber home that day, spent 3 days barely able to move, surviving on crackers and whatever I could reach from my couch. My boss was understanding, gave me 2 weeks off, but I used most of it alone in my apartment, really thinking about what my life had become. That's when I made the decision. I opened my laptop and started making changes. First, I removed my credit card from their grocery delivery account. Then I called the landlord and told him I wouldn't be covering their rent anymore. The car loan company got a similar call. One by one, I severed every financial tie that had bound me to their survival for 6 years. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. I knew the rent was due on the 1st, and today was the 8th. I knew their refrigerator was probably getting empty. I knew Dad's truck payment was overdue. But I also knew they'd made their choice when they told me I wasn't their responsibility. I was making coffee this morning when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the window, I saw Dad's truck, Mom climbing out of the passenger seat, and my sister getting out of the back with both kids. They looked frantic, desperate in a way I'd never seen before. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by pounding. Dad's voice carried through the door, loud and demanding, asking why I'd stopped the payments. Mom was crying, talking about eviction notices and empty cupboards. Sister was practically screaming about her kids going hungry. I opened the door and stood there, looking at these people who had raised me, who I'd loved and supported unconditionally. Dad pushed past me into my living room, his face red with anger, demanding to know what kind of son abandons his family. Mom followed, mascara streaking down her cheeks, asking how I could be so cruel. My sister held her youngest, using the baby as a shield while she accused me of being heartless. Standing in my own home, being berated by the people I'd sacrificed for, something crystallized in my mind. I asked them a simple question. Where were they when I was lying in a hospital bed, scared and alone? Where was their concern when I needed help? The room fell silent except for Mom sniffling. Dad tried to backtrack then, saying they'd been busy, that they thought I was fine, that family emergencies were different. But I reminded him of his exact words. "You're not our responsibility." I told them those words had freed me from feeling responsible for them too. The argument that followed was brutal. Sister accused me of using money to control them. Dad said I was being vindictive. Mom begged me to think about the grandchildren. But every plea, every accusation, every manipulation tactic they perfected over the years just reinforced my decision. I laid out the numbers for them. $62,000 over 6 years. $62,000 of my money, my sacrifices, my delayed dreams. Money I'd given freely, without expectation, because I loved them. And the one time I needed something in return, not money, just presence, just care, they'd abandoned me. Dad tried one last approach, his voice softer, talking about how proud they were of my success, how grateful they were for everything I'd done. But his gratitude felt hollow when it only appeared after the money stopped flowing. I told them they had 48 hours to figure out their situation, and then I wanted them off my property. As they left, Sister turned back at the door, her youngest still in her arms, and asked what she was supposed to tell her kids when they had nothing to eat. The manipulation was so obvious, so calculated, that I almost laughed. I told her to tell them the truth, that actions have consequences, and adults need to take responsibility for their choices. Update 1. The 48 hours passed without a word from them. I thought maybe they'd found alternative solutions, swallowed their pride, and figured things out. I was wrong. On day 3, Mom showed up alone. She looked smaller somehow, wearing the same clothes she'd had on during the confrontation. She sat in my living room and tried a different approach, the guilt trip. She talked about how she'd carried me for 9 months, raised me, sacrificed for me. She painted a picture of their desperation, of Dad applying for minimum wage jobs at his age, of Sister trying to find work without childcare. But then she made a mistake. In her emotional plea, she let slip that Dad had refused 2 job offers in the past month because they were beneath him. Warehouse work and retail, jobs that millions of people do to support their families, were apparently too degrading for a man who'd been living off his son's charity for 6 years. I asked Mom why she was really there. After an hour of tears and manipulation, she finally admitted they'd been counting on me indefinitely. They'd made no plans, saved no money, prepared for nothing. My monthly payments weren't help. They were their entire financial strategy. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Dad, calling from someone else's phone, his voice different than I'd ever heard it. Broken. He told me the electricity had been shut off, that they were sitting in the dark, that Sister's kids were crying. He asked what it would take for me to forgive them. I told him forgiveness and financial support were 2 different things. I could work toward forgiving them, but I would never again tie my money to their survival. If he wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be built on something other than my wallet. Update 2. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I heard through our elderly neighbor that they'd moved out of the house. The landlord had started eviction proceedings, and they'd packed up and left in the middle of the night. Part of me felt guilty, the part that had been trained for 6 years to feel responsible for their well-being. But then I did something I hadn't done in years. I booked a vacation. A real one, with a nice hotel and actual activities, not the budget weekend trips I'd been limiting myself to. Sitting on a beach in Florida, watching the sunset without checking my phone for emergency requests for money, I realized how much of my life I'd been giving away. When I returned, there was a letter waiting for me. Not a card or a note. A formal letter, typed and printed. It was from Dad, and it was different from anything he'd ever written to me. He acknowledged what had happened, took responsibility for his words in the hospital, and admitted they'd taken advantage of my generosity. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make excuses. He just apologized. The letter explained they were staying with Mom's sister in another state. Dad had taken a job at a hardware store, and Sister was working part-time while the kids were in school. It wasn't easy, but they were managing. He ended by saying he hoped someday I could forgive them, not for money, but for the relationship we used to have. I read that letter 3 times before I called him. Our conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses and careful words. But for the first time in years, we talked without the undercurrent of financial need. He sounded tired but honest in a way I hadn't heard since before he lost his job. I told him I was glad they were figuring things out, but I also made it clear that my decision was permanent. I wouldn't be returning to the role of family financier, no matter how well things went between us. He said he understood, and for the first time, I believed him. Update 3. It's been 6 months now since that confrontation in my driveway. The angry calls stopped after the first month. The guilt trips ended after the second. What replaced them was something I hadn't expected: actual family relationships. Mom sends me pictures of her small garden behind my aunt's house. She's always loved gardening, but never had time when she was stressed about bills. Sister updates me on the kids' school progress and her new job at a local credit union. She sounds different in her messages, tired but proud, like someone who's discovered her own capability. Dad and I talk every few weeks now. Short conversations about sports, weather, normal things. He tells me about his co-workers and the satisfaction he gets from fixing things at the hardware store. He doesn't sound like the defeated man who spent years on my couch, waiting for his next handout. He sounds like someone who remembers who he used to be. The guilt hasn't completely gone away. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have found a middle ground. But then I look at my savings account, growing for the first time in years. I think about the promotion I got last month, the one I could focus on because I wasn't distracted by constant family crises. I remember the peace I felt on that beach, the freedom of not being anyone's financial lifeline. Last week, I got an unexpected package. Inside was a picture frame with a photo of all of us from about 8 years ago, before Dad lost his job, before I became their solution to everything. We all looked happy and independent. On the back, someone had written, "To new beginnings and old love." I don't know who sent it, but I put it on my mantle. Not because I'm ready to go back to how things were, but because it reminds me that family love and financial obligation don't have to be the same thing. Real love doesn't come with a price tag or an expectation of payment. They say the best revenge is living well, but I've learned it's more than that. The best revenge is setting boundaries that force everyone to become their best selves. Dad found work he takes pride in. Sister discovered her own strength. Mom rediscovered her passions. And I learned that saying no to being used isn't selfish, it's necessary. I still love my family. I probably always will. But I love myself too. And that took me 32 years and $62,000 to figure out. Some lessons are expensive, but they're worth every penny when they teach you the difference between being generous and being taken advantage of. The man who told me I wasn't his responsibility was right about one thing. I'm not responsible for fixing everyone else's problems. But he was wrong about something else. Family isn't about obligation or emergency ATM services. It's about mutual respect, genuine care, and showing up when it matters most. Not with money, but with presence. 6 months ago, they were begging in my driveway. Today, we're all better off. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the chance to save themselves.